Well, the claim I'm going to be responding to today is that surrogacy should not be allowed to continue. This was presented by Grace, I believe. My opponent's claims were that there are going to be mental and psychological issues for the parties involved, with subpoints that say that releasing the child may be psychologically distressing for the mother, that the surrogate children will present something similar to adopted child syndrome, and that there is a certain bond formed with the mother and child. And her second secondary claim is that surrogacy is the commercialization of reproduction and has a high risk of exploitation for the women involved. The first respond to the first secondary claim is that most, if not all, of the psychological issues involved, at least for the surrogate mother, are going to be an assumed risk when going into the surrogacy. And the mother doesn't have to be giving up her uterus for a surrogacy pregnancy. It's entirely her decision. So by agreeing to do so, she's assuming the risk of any psychological issues. As to the second point, that most, if not all, surrogate children are going to show some sort of psychological problem that seems to be consistent with adopted child syndrome, I'd like to argue that because it's called adopted child syndrome, and we already have adopted children, therefore it's already a risk that we're taking with other children in a practice that seems to be considered good amongst most people. I mean, most people won't disagree that adoption is a very useful and good thing to do when you can't have a child. So why should surrogacy be any different when they're showing the exact same syndrome? Why should that change things? And then, thirdly, to go against the claim that there's a certain bond formed with a mother and child, a lot of the evidence used in the initial argument was that things such as skin-to-skin contact, eye gazing, and breastfeeding all release oxytocin that basically creates this bond between mother and child, and that's going to cause problems if the child is immediately given up to another mother. But from what it read to me like is that most of this occurs postnatally after the mother has given birth. So why is it an issue if mother is giving birth, giving up the child, and the child will have those same bonds with just a different person? But the child was just birthed from the womb of the original mother. The child doesn't actually know the original mother. Then, for the secondary thing, the first point is that surrogacy is pretty much a womb for rent, since when did babies become something that people can buy? And that's a direct quote from the original speech. And to me that sounds like failed logic, because people aren't actually paying for the baby itself. People are paying the woman for the right to use her uterus for a baby. They're not just buying babies. It's not like we're going to buy babies off the black market or something. We're simply just renting out the womb, I guess. We're not buying the baby. And the next point was that the women are going to be easily exploited because of commercialization, and I believe the second point was that when large money is involved, exploitation is always a risk. But I'd like to argue that exploitation really doesn't occur because exploitation implies some sort of negative harm to the surrogate mother, or some sort of lack of compensation or something. But from what I read, surrogate mothers are frequently paid really well. Their health is taken care of because the parents that are going to get the child are really concerned about the health of the baby in return. So there's not really any exploitation happening. The women are offering themselves up for surrogacy, and they're being compensated rather well. And then finally, my last argument against it is that she argues that, she doesn't really argue, she brings up the point that these children are being outsourced to third world countries, but it's not really said that that's a bad thing. It just brings up the fact that outsourcing is occurring. And furthermore, she goes on to say that, or cite an article that it was in 2007 saying that there was surrogacies being outsourced to India from all sorts of countries. And then her final line in that is that that's just from 2007. I'm pretty sure that number has increased in the past 5 years. What I want to say is that we have no proof that it's increased in the last 5 years, just by that's pure speculation. For all we know, that's actually gone down because of complex laws involving citizenship when giving birth in another country. And to conclude, She cites a California Supreme Court case in 1993 where they basically held that even though another woman is giving birth, the mother who paid, or the mother who the child is intended for, or provided the egg for, would be the rightful mother, and that's been backed up in many other cases. And I think that would argue that surrogacy is okay on many levels, and that even the government is approving of it.
All right, Kyle, everything's organized very easy to follow, so I think you do a pretty good job on that. You explain the points as you go through the presentations, and so we're not having any difficulty following the reasoning that you're presenting. But most of your arguments consist of questions and presses that are being made against the advocate's case. There's no particular challenge to any of their evidence, and there's no evidence from your point of view on any of these points. This would be a very good speech given immediately after the advocate's presentation if you hadn't had 2 weeks worth of time to do some research and develop answers to these arguments. These are okay arguments. Like I said, if you made these right after the presentation, I'd say that was a good presentation for a spontaneous response. But having had some time to respond, I think that, or to prepare, I think that you're missing some points. For example, when you talk about the bonding issue, well, since we have thousands of cases of, or at least hundreds of cases of surrogate mothers and so on and so forth, there's probably some information out there about that, but you haven't discovered any of that. On the issue of whether or not there's exploitation of the women, okay, well, we've got people who've expressed an opinion about that, and again, we've got hundreds of, maybe thousands of cases where this is the case, and what do they say about this? And we don't know. It's mere speculation at this particular point. There are large groups of law firms that organize and structure this, and believe that they're doing a good thing for everybody involved, and almost certainly they've got some advocacy points on their sites, in their news publications, their press releases, and we get nothing from any of them. So it just feels like you're kind of cruising by on an okay analysis of what's going on, but haven't done much to develop the argument. And I think that's the biggest problem that you've got going on here. All right, thank you.